Hey there, folks. This is John Oates, and you are listening to Everything Fab Four right here on Salon.com.
Welcome to Everything Fab Four, a new podcast focused on fun and intelligent stories about the Beatles. I'm your host, Ken Womack, music culture columnist for Salon.com and a Beatles scholar and historian. No other band, or popular phenomenon for that matter, has enjoyed the global impact of the Beatles. They are part of our human fabric. They created an enduring music that brings people together, and just about everyone has their own Beatles story to tell. Some that are surprisingly deep and unexpected. With each episode, we'll be featuring a new guest to share their Fab Four journey, along with amazing theme music from Black Rabbit. Remember, it's a Beatles world, and everybody has a story.
I don't have that kind of patience. Like, I don't want to work on something for years and years and years. Like, I can't fathom that. I don't know how some people do it. Like, I just lose interest.
Today's guest is a bona fide Broadway star, and he has plenty of Beatles stories to tell. Adam Pascal is an American actor, singer, and musician, known for his performance as Roger Davis in the original cast of Rent, Jonathan Larson's award-winning Broadway musical. Adam played the role on London's West End stage and subsequent touring productions around the world. He even played the part in Chris Columbus's 2005 film adaptation of Rent. But Adam is no one-trick pony. He has also appeared in Broadway productions of Elton John and Tim Rice's Aida, Rice's Chess, Pretty Woman, and classic musicals such as Memphis, Cabaret, Hair, and Chicago. In 2019, he returned to Broadway yet again, playing none other than William Shakespeare in the Tony Award-winning musical Something Rotten. Over the years, he's even recorded 5 albums. Welcome, Adam Pascal. Now, Adam, you're a serious fan. You even named your son Lennon. So I want to know, how is it that we're still listening to the Beatles 50 years later?
I mean, first of all, I don't know anyone who's not a fan. You don't have to be an avid fan. You don't have to be somebody who listens to their music or puts it on. But I don't know anyone who would turn it off if it comes on the radio. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think that human exists.
I don't think that human exists either. Well, at a certain point, all of our Beatles journeys begin somewhere, someplace, sometime. What was your first taste of the Beatles? What was that song that got you hooked?
I want to say I Want to Hold Your Hand was the first song I heard.
Well, given that I'm talking to a bona fide Broadway performer, that seems like the perfect beginning, right? I mean, many of those early Beatles songs were these kinds of miniature musical numbers, the kind you might hear in a West End show, in the Beatles' case, or on Broadway.
Back in sort of the late 50s and early 60s, the music in musicals wasn't so different than what pop music was, than what was happening in the world of music in general. You know, it's only as time progressed and music progressed and pop became rock and rock splintered off in all these different directions, and then the hip hop, and it's obviously it's funny now with Hamilton and Rent and things like that. It's sort of like every once in a while it comes full circle, but like the Broadway, and I use the word Broadway to sort of encompass all musicals, that music became further and further distant from what pop music was over time.
How does that shift occur, Adam? What makes that shift possible, where Broadway becomes more sophisticated, I guess?
As like the Stephen Sondheims, and like the music became much more complex and heady, and it really became much more distant, and Andrew Lloyd Webber and all that stuff became much more distant from what you would hear on the radio. But I think that back in, again, especially certainly the late 50s and early 60s, I don't think it was that different. You know what I mean? I think the musical vocabulary that was being used to write those songs was somewhat similar to the musical vocabulary that people were using to write, songs that would be heard on the radio.
No, I hear what you mean. So, in other words, those songs during that period, particularly in the early part of the Beatles' heyday, would have involved songs like She Loves You, which tell little miniature stories about, in that case, a couple that can't communicate, or other stories about loss or reunion, or those sorts of great tropes.
Sort of like the simplicity of the concept of love. You know what I mean? Like the early Beatles stuff very much reveled in that. You know what I mean? And the innocence in many ways. I want to hold your hand, love me do, all my loving. You know what I mean? Like they're very sort of like they are innocent in their sentiment.
Of course, that sentimentality, that sense of innocence was destined, right? Not to last. It simply couldn't survive the further they went on.
Certainly John's influence, I think, was the influence that gave it more of the danger. You know what I mean? I definitely think that he was more of the dangerous sort of yin of the yang.
The yin of the yang. I think we've just coined our first phrase on everything Fab Four, thanks to you, Adam. It has always occurred to me that it is John who tends to up the ante in terms of the subject matter of their work. Take, for example, No Reply on the Beatles for Sale album. Quite suddenly you have John working in really dangerous territory. I mean, that character, unlike the one in those very earliest of Beatles songs, is a stalker. Well, while we have you here, I would be remiss not to ask about Rent, which has been so significant in your life and career. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the background that brought you there.
I mean, interestingly enough, obviously it came at the very beginning of my career, and I've done many shows since, but that certainly is the biggest success that I've been a part of. And so, so that certainly is what I'm most known for. And I'm incredibly proud of that. It's great to be associated with something that after all these years still has all this incredible longevity and still has an impact on people, on younger people. It's not like it's still just the fans from 25 years ago. It's like I have kids, young teenagers who are still getting hooked into it.
Absolutely, I do. In fact, I've had the pleasure of seeing college-age students lip syncing along with the words. Of course, one of the great tragedies of the story of Rent and its backstory and the making of it is that Jonathan Larson died so young. But did you get to know him, given that you were working on the ground floor? And of course, as the writer of the book, he would have been right there, correct?
I didn't know him for that long because, I was cast in December of '95. And he died 2 months later. He died in January of '96. So I only knew him for a few weeks, and I knew him within the context of the rehearsal studio. And within that context, he was very much in the background. You know what I mean? The majority of his work was already completed. So, you go into the rehearsal situation and the director and the musical director take over, and they become the dominant figures in the room. And so Jonathan, his presence was very felt, obviously, but was subtle in the room on a day-to-day basis. You know what I mean? He was just very much an observer in that, watching this thing that he created come to life.
Well, it must have been gratifying for him to see this thing that he had slaved over for so many years really come into existence. And of course, what we know that he never got to find out was that it would become this cultural phenomenology, this thing that was much larger than him. But of course, he must have slaved over it for years.
Well, yes, and he did. He worked on this for many years. And I always, I'm a songwriter. I've written tons of songs, and I have records out, and I am and have worked on a musical, and I don't have that kind of patience. Like I don't want to work on something for years and years and years. Like I can't fathom that. But look, musical theater composers, sort of many of them do that, you know. And these processes, these long processes over years of you know, writing and workshopping and rewriting and then workshopping and doing readings and this and that. Like I don't know how some people do it. Like I just lose interest, you know. Like, you know, I love the way Elton John writes songs, which is if he doesn't write it in 20 minutes, it doesn't get written, and it goes away.
That's right. He gets the lyrics from Bernie Taupin, and it happens or it doesn't.
And that's, I mean, clearly a testament to his brilliance in that it just comes to him like so quickly, again, or it doesn't. But I just love that, like, it's just boom, you know, it's done. You know, so it takes a certain amount of love and patience for your process to be able to stick to it for that amount of time. You may go through phases where like it doesn't do so, like you have a reading, the reading doesn't go well, you get bad, you know, you don't like, you get too much criticism and too many opinions, and then it's like, how do I sift through this and you know, like not just throw the whole thing out, you know, the baby with the bathwater. Like I don't have that kind of mind, you know what I mean? And I'm always so impressed with people that do that can stay focused and not get so discouraged that they just scrap the whole idea.
Now, I've got to believe a little bit you're selling yourself short. I mean, you've been in many, many musical productions that have taken, if not years, certainly months or weeks to prepare. I've got to feel like you are very versed in the idea of rehearsal, right, and preparing for a role. Isn't that true?
Well, it depends. You know, look, there's two experiences that I've had, which is the experience of creating a new role, which I did in Rent and in Aida, and then taking over an already existing role. And they both have their pros and cons. I am, not surprisingly, after what we just discussed, I'm much more of a fan of taking over an already existing role, you know, because it's already the grunt work has already been done by somebody else. You know what I mean? It's sort of like, okay, I just got to put on the costume and learn the words and have somebody teach me choreography, and I'm good to go. You know, and generally that's 2 weeks. You know, I've in all the roles that I've taken over on Broadway, you get 2 weeks to learn it, and you're in. And you know, it's a lot, and it's a very intense 2 weeks, because you know, at least my process is I'll rehearse, you know, 8-10 hours a day, and then I'll go and rehearse 3 or 4 hours at home, like by myself. You know, just going over stuff, and especially when it comes to choreography, like I have to really put in the effort for that because I'm not a trained dancer. So like I have to really put in extra work to learn how to memorize all that stuff. But it's a lot, you know what I mean? But again, in 2 weeks you're on the stage and you're doing it. And as opposed to creating a role, you know what I mean? Like you could stay with a show for years. You know what I mean? If you get cast early on in sort of like readings and early workshops, and you end up staying with it the whole time, you know, those processes are in many cases years long. And here's the kicker. Here's the worst thing, is that you could start with something and stay with it for years, and then they go, hey, we're going to Broadway, we're replacing you. You know what I mean? Like that happens too. You know what I mean? That happens to people as well. They put in all this work and they create this role over years and years and years, and then they get replaced when it goes to Broadway.
Well, thinking about the Beatles for a moment, of course, they would toil for years and years and years before they finally found the right producer in George Martin and hooked up with EMI, and of course, within a matter of months, had a #1 song in Please Please Me, and the rest was history with British Beatlemania and American Beatlemania. So I'm going to give you the absolutely absurd question that is only fun on shows like this one, and would be an absolute horror in real life, and that is, if you're on the desert island, the proverbial desert island, and you have to pick one song, which Beatles song is it? Why would you make that choice?
I'll say a song, but if you ask me in an hour, I would say a different song, but probably A Day in the Life.
The agony that you just seem to experience really demonstrates, I guess, the futility of this kind of activity, right? But A Day in the Life is certainly a very, very good choice for that desert island experience.
I think it's one of the most brilliant songs ever written by anybody. And it's in such a short amount of time goes on such a wonderful journey. You know what I mean? From from the sort of the dark melodicness of the verses to the sort of the more up tempo quirkiness of the bridge. The symphonic outro, the symphonic, incredibly crescendoing dramatic outro. The backwards messages at the end, but I think that would if there was one that could sort of satisfy in the smallest way all of those things, it's that song, I think.
Well, fortunately, this is just a mere thought experiment, and you don't actually have to be marooned on a desert island and limited to one Beatles song, but that certainly is a good one, and you're in great company because, of course, no less than Leonard Bernstein also listed that as his favorite. Speaking of experiments or projects or what have you, I've been very intrigued with your project as an artist, wherein you are juxtaposing music hall standards, music standards, with well-known rock tunes, which gives them, through that juxtaposition, it gives us a new kind of reading of those songs by hearing them next to each other. I wonder if you could tell us more about that project, which you've described, and I like the title personally, as the new standards.
Yeah, look, I'm well aware that the pretentiousness of calling them the new standards, so I get that, but I kind of went with it anyway. Yeah, I mean, look, my musical background is very specific with regards to my connection to musical theater. I grew up obviously a rock fan. You know what I mean? And the music that I am most drawn to, and the music that I am most drawn to creatively to create, is of the rock genre in one way or another. And so I thought it would be interesting to start experimenting with some musical theater songs in a way that gave them a little bit more of a rock musical vocabulary than they were originally created with. Like Not a Day Goes By Stephen Sondheim is a good example.
Well, to my ears, it's more than just a great example of a song that you can juxtapose. It's a great example of your talent. And as folks will hear in this sample right now, it's just a beautifully realized song.
Not a day goes by, not a single day, but you're somewhere a part of my life, and it looks like you'll stay as the days go by. I keep thinking, when does it end? Where's the day I'll have started forgetting? But I just go on thinking and sweating and cursing and crying, and turning and reaching and waking and dying. And no, not a day goes by.
And you can hear this and other songs on Adam's EP, The New Standards. And it's just absolutely terrific, and this song never fails to get me. What great stuff.
Oh, thank you. I'm really proud of that version. I thought it came out really well. And it's interesting the way that those come to me. Like, I don't necessarily set out to do a specific song. What happens a lot of times is, like, I'll be listening to a particular song, or I'll hear a certain song, and I'll just get an idea about, like, oh, that might sound cool if I do it this way, or if I blend it with this. A lot of times I'll take songs and I will blend them and I don't know if I've recorded any of them, but like I certainly have performed many of them live, where I will blend them with more modern songs. So one of the things that I've done a lot in my live shows is I've taken the song Joanna from Sweeney Todd by Stephen Sondheim, and I've blended it with a Jeff Buckley song called Lover You Should Have Come Over. And I've put those two songs together, and like they work so well together. They meshed so well.
Well, certainly they do. And of course they create a kind of drama together, which of course in your Desert Island song, A Day in the Life, is what's so compelling. Here is a song that has different movements, different storylines, a very apocalyptic final note that is foreboding, even signifying, as they wanted it to, the end of the world. So how do you find that drama in music, whether it's the Beatles or otherwise?
I've always been incredibly influenced by music and drama, which I think is what drew me in many ways to musical theater, because I've always been a fan of the concept album. You know, the concept album has always been a huge thing in my life, from Pink Floyd's The Wall to Tommy. There's a band called Queensryche who I was a huge fan of. They had this amazing concept album called Operation Mindcrime that I was a huge fan of. All of this stuff, like, storytelling through music has always been something that I have been drawn to. And especially these, like, entire beginning to end, The Wall. I mean, I know I just said it, but like, God, have I listened to that thing a million times in my life. And, and what an experience to listen to it from beginning to end. You know what I mean? Like, and I hate to sound like an old man, but like, kids don't experience that anymore. That's not the way they absorb music. That's not the way they listen to music.
You need to be careful here, Adam. The next thing you know, you're going to be telling those kids to stay off of your yard. But you're right. There is a different generational mindset at work.
To sit down for 2 hours is so foreign to them. To you know what I mean? To go on that kind of purely auditory journey, you know what I mean, for that amount of time is so foreign. But is such an incredible experience that I feel so lucky that I grew up when I did.
I couldn't agree more. I mean, we're roughly contemporaries, and the experience of taking that auditory journey, as you just described it, is really something special and magnificent. But having said that, I think we're all going to be really pleasantly surprised with what Generation Z or Gen Z brings to the table. These are folks who, they're up for anything. I'm telling you, they are up for absolutely anything. They are excited about art and literature and music and cooking and, you name it. They want knowledge, and it's our job to clear those pathways for them.
You're so right in that good art does always win out. And there are so many wonderful examples of people who are still sort of carrying that torch, in many ways. But on a whole, as a society, obviously we have evolved or devolved in any way you want to look at it, in a way that doesn't support that kind of creative process. Record companies don't support, if they even exist in whatever way they even exist today, don't support that kind of thing. For the most part, people's attention spans are incredibly short. But yes, great things, there's something happening right now, very recently. These two young teenagers they were given In the Air Tonight by Phil Collins to listen to, and it blew their minds. And now that song is like back on the charts. It's like number 2, you know what I mean? Because it exposed all of these people to that song that had never heard it before, and it's such an amazing song that everyone was like, oh my God, this is awesome, But you've got to present it to people and go, you know what, you may not have had the opportunity to hear something like this, but listen to it. And 9 times out of 10, they're like, oh my God, that's amazing.
Now, rumor has it that you're not just a Beatles guy, that for a time it was all about the Bay City Rollers. Is there any chance that they'll get the new standard treatment so you can acquaint them to a whole new audience?
I need to reacquaint myself to the Bay City Rollers. It's been a long time. But they were the first rock band that I remember being a fan of before the Beatles. Like it was like there was somehow I was given that record in whatever year it was in the 70s. And I remember I lived in the Bronx, and I remember in my bedroom, I could only have been 5 or 6 years old, putting on this record. I can even picture the record player. I had this yellow record player I had, and just being mesmerized by this band and these songs, you know, and they were the first. They have not returned to my my auditory experience probably since then, but they were the first. Them and Barry Manilow. Barry Manilow was also, you know, I was exposed to him at around that same time, and just fell in love, and still do. I mean, just an absolutely brilliant songwriter, and you know. But those were the earliest things that I can remember.
I'm glad you mentioned Barry Manilow. You know, he's been kind of the whipping post for folks who knock bubblegum or saccharine music or what have you. But he was so influential, particularly in the 1970s. Of course, during our own era, it would be tough to remember things without talking about COVID. You must be acutely aware of the experience of your colleagues right now on Broadway as they attempt to see their way through with, well, Broadway in its entirety being dark until January 21.
Yeah. The only way out is with a vaccine. That's the only way out.
Well, I know you stand with me in hoping that day comes sooner rather than later, when a vaccine is available, because so much a great American art form exists inside of theater and musical theater, and of course Broadway is the great white light that leads the way.
Ultimately, the live experience can never be reproduced. There are, you know, life is going to change in many ways once there is a vaccine, and we quote unquote going to go back to normal. There are many things that won't return because of the proven capability of, oh, I don't need to be there to do this. I can do this over Zoom and over the computer. Like, there are so many businesses and things that now that like won't. I just read an article about all the empty office buildings in Manhattan, and how they're going to stay empty. You know what I mean? Because a lot of these companies realize they don't need to spend all of this money. All of this can happen, and has been happening, from people working at home. You know what I mean? So like, a lot of things are going to change, but the only thing that can't change is the experience of being in a theater and watching, and not just musical theater, but music in general, the live experience of watching performers in front of you. You know, I know Hamilton and the movie of Hamilton like is so popular right now, and it's this huge thing, but you know what? It's only because it's Hamilton. It's only, you know, like, if like nobody wants to watch a live filmed version of a stage show. It's horrible. You don't get the feeling. And again, the only reason why the Hamilton one is successful is because it's this juggernaut of a meteoric show that is so.
It's the outlier, is what it is.
It's not the norm, and it's not how this business is going to go. You know, I've read articles that like, oh, this is not the new norm. No, it's not. Because you know what? I watched it, or I watched some of it. I turned it off because I was like, this sucks. I don't want to watch this on TV. You know what I mean? This is not how this is meant to be. You know what I mean? Filming something on a stage you're mixing these mediums that aren't meant to be mixed. You know what I mean? It doesn't work, you know? And so I have faith in that idea. I have faith that like people will always want to get in a room, and no matter what happens with technology, no matter how culture goes, I truly feel that the experience of being in a room will never be replaced. And I say this to my kids, and I use this as an example about their futures and their job opportunities. No matter what happens in this world, no matter what happens with culture, no matter what happens with technology, people will always need plumbers and plumbing. There will never be, that will never go away. If you learn how to be a plumber, you will always work. If you learn how to be an electrician, you will always work. If you learn how to build with your hands, you will always work, because there will never be a substitute for it. You can never, you know what I mean? And so I feel like that's the same, it's the same concept. There are certain things that no matter what happens, we will always need. We will always need somebody to do that thing, you know, because we need it.
I couldn't agree more. And I think art, as you've already said, will out in that way. People just absolutely adore being able to share live experience, whether it's a concert or a musical, with other people in that kind of shared space.
There are certain experiences that will never be altered.
Thank you so much for being with us today, Adam. You've given us a lot to think about.
Absolutely.
Everything Fab Four is presented by Salon.com, the premier news, politics, innovation, and arts website. For more information, visit everythingfab4.com, where you can learn more about our podcast and my latest Beatles-related book, Living the Beatles Legend, The Untold Story of Mal Evans. The Everything Fab Four theme song, Seize the Day, is provided courtesy of Black Rabbit, the high-octane Beatles cover band, an innovative psychedelic rock project from Rockaway Beach, Queens in New York City. Like what you heard today on Everything Fab Four? Be sure to subscribe, give us a rating, and recommend the show to your friends. Plus, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter at EF4 Podcast. Distributed by Salon.com, Everything Fab Four is a Wonderwall production. Remember, it's a Beatles world, and everyone has a story.